Today, the beaches of Normandy can look strangely peaceful. The tide moves in and out as it always has. Families walk across the sand. Visitors stand quietly beside old concrete bunkers, reading plaques, taking photographs, trying to imagine what happened here on the morning of June 6, 1944. But the strange thing about Normandy is that imagination is not always needed. Some people say the place still feels occupied by memory. On D-Day, nearly 160,000 Allied troops crossed the Channel and landed along 5 beaches: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. American, British, Canadian, Free French, and other Allied forces came ashore under fire, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. It was the beginning of the Allied campaign to break into Nazi-occupied Western Europe, and it came at a terrible cost. Omaha Beach became the bloodiest of the landing beaches. At Pointe du Hoc, US Rangers climbed sheer cliffs into gunfire. Inland, paratroopers landed in darkness, scattered across fields, villages, marshes, and farms. Some never reached their objectives. Some never made it out of Normandy at all. And perhaps that is why the ghost stories here feel different. They are not just tales of shadows in old ruins. They are stories attached to places where fear, duty, confusion, and death arrived all at once. Visitors speak of voices in bunkers, figures moving near the cliffs, cold patches inside old gun positions, and the strange feeling that the land itself remembers. Whether these stories are hauntings, battlefield trauma, folklore, or the mind trying to understand a place too heavy with history, Normandy remains one of those rare locations where the past does not feel safely locked away. It feels close, sometimes uncomfortably close. The name behind the invasion was Operation Overlord, and even now it carries a weight that is hard to ignore. But for the men moving toward Normandy, the name was not what mattered in those final hours. What mattered was the rough water beneath them, the aircraft overhead, the French coast somewhere ahead, and the knowledge that the waiting was almost over. By then, the operation had stopped being a plan on paper. It had become real, immediate, and frighteningly personal. Once the ramp dropped, every man knew there would be no easy way back. And that is where the atmosphere of Normandy begins to change. The ghost stories connected to D-Day do not come from castles, old mansions, or lonely graveyards. They come from places built for fear. Concrete bunkers where German soldiers waited under bombardment. Beaches where young Allied troops stepped into open fire. Fields where paratroopers landed, far from the men they knew. Villages where civilians hid in cellars and listened to the sky shake above them. Would you believe that some visitors say they feel the mood shift before they even know the full story of where they are standing? One moment, they are looking at an old gun position or a quiet stretch of sand. The next, the place feels heavier, colder, as if the silence has a pressure of its own. Of course, there are practical reasons for that. Concrete bunkers hold damp. Underground rooms trap cold air. Empty military ruins have a way of playing tricks on the mind. But still, people keep reporting the same kinds of feelings in the same kinds of places. That is why Operation Overlord matters to these stories. Not because every detail needs to be explained, but because the invasion created a landscape where history and haunting now sit side by side. The beaches, the bunkers, the cliffs, the farms, and the village streets were not just backdrops to war. They were the places where thousands of ordinary men were pushed into moments of terror most people today can barely imagine. And when a place has carried that much fear, grief, and memory, perhaps it is no surprise that some people still feel as though something has been left behind. The first haunting reports around Omaha Beach often begin inside the old concrete bunkers that still face the shore. Inside the old bunkers, the atmosphere changes quickly. Outside, there may be daylight, wind, and people walking along the paths. But once you step into the concrete rooms, everything feels different. The walls are thick, the air is colder, the sound changes. Even a normal footstep can seem louder than it should. And the narrow openings facing the beach remind you exactly why these places were built. These were fighting positions, built for men who knew an invasion might come at any moment. During the bombardment, German crews waited inside these rooms while the concrete shook around them and the beach below disappeared under smoke and shellfire. That is what makes the bunkers uncomfortable today. They are not strange because of anything obvious. They are strange because they are so bare and practical. Thick walls, low ceilings, narrow openings, and the thought that frightened men once stood there, looking out toward the same shoreline visitors now see in daylight. Over the years, visitors have claimed to experience small things inside these bunkers that are difficult to explain at the time. A sudden coldness near one wall, a feeling that somebody has moved behind them, a voice heard close by, even though the room appears to be empty. These stories are rarely dramatic. They usually happen quickly, and that is part of what makes them unsettling. There is no time to prepare for them, and often no clear way to prove what happened afterwards. One of the most repeated types of report involves short warnings or commands. People have claimed to hear words like "get down" or "stay low" near old defensive positions, as if the warning is coming from someone who is still reacting to danger. Now, there are sensible explanations for this. A sound from another visitor can travel strangely through concrete. Wind can move through openings and create odd effects. And when someone already knows the history of Omaha, the mind can easily turn a half-heard noise into something more meaningful. But imagine being inside one of those rooms, standing near a firing slit that faces the beach, when a voice seems to speak from just behind you. That is the kind of moment people remember. Photographs have also become part of the folklore. Some visitors take pictures inside the darker sections of the bunkers, and later notice what appears to be a figure or face in the image. Most of the time, this can probably be explained by shadow, damp marks, damaged concrete, or the flash catching the wall at a strange angle. But the stories continue because the setting changes how people react to what they see. A strange shape in an ordinary building is easy to dismiss. A strange shape inside a wartime bunker overlooking Omaha Beach feels different. The cold spots are the same. Old concrete can feel cold for very normal reasons, especially in shaded rooms where damp air has nowhere to go. But when people describe these cold patches, they often mention the feeling that comes with them. Not just a drop in temperature, but a sudden heaviness, as if the room has changed around them. That is the pattern with the Omaha reports. They are not huge ghostly scenes. They are small, personal moments. A voice, a photograph, a cold patch, the feeling of someone nearby. None of them prove anything on their own, but they keep being attached to the same kind of place. The bunkers, the old openings, the concrete rooms facing the beach. And that is where Omaha's haunted reputation really begins. Not with one famous ghost, but with visitors stepping into those old Atlantic wall positions and coming back out feeling that something inside was not completely empty. A few miles west of Omaha Beach, the land rises sharply at Pointe du Hoc. It is one of the most recognizable places connected to DDay because so much of it still looks damaged. The ground is uneven and broken. Deep craters remain across the site, left by bombing and naval shelling. Concrete positions still sit in the grass, some cracked open, some half buried, as if the battle ended only a short time ago. On the morning of June 6, 1944, US Army Rangers were sent to take this position because German guns here could have threatened the American landings at Omaha and Utah. To reach it, the Rangers had to come in from the sea, cross the beach below, and climb cliffs around 100 feet high while under fire. Most of the remaining Rangers reached the top at around 7:40 in the morning, according to the American Battle Monuments Commission. The guns they had been sent to destroy had already been moved from their prepared positions, but the Rangers found them inland and disabled them. After 2 days of fighting, only about 90 Rangers were still standing when relief finally reached them. And because the landscape still holds so much of its wartime shape, it is not surprising that ghost stories have gathered here too. Some visitors claim they have seen figures near the cliff path or moving along the edge of the site, especially later in the day when the light starts to fade. These are usually not described as clear apparitions, standing still and facing witnesses. They are more often described as quick shapes, half noticed at first. Like men moving through a place they know well. By the time the witness turns properly to look, the figure is gone. Other stories are connected to the cliffs themselves. People have reported seeing what looked like soldiers climbing, not in a clear scene, but in broken glimpses. A shape against the rock. Movement where no one should be climbing. The suggestion of a helmet or a shoulder before it disappears. Most people who tell these stories do not claim they watched a full ghostly replay from beginning to end. It is usually much smaller than that, and perhaps that is why the reports feel more believable. They sound like the kind of thing a person might question afterwards, replaying it in their mind and wondering whether they really saw anything at all. There are also reports of sounds carried on the wind around Pointe du Hoc. Visitors have described hearing faint shouts, cries, or what they thought was movement across the cratered ground, only to find no one close enough to explain it. The practical side should not be ignored. This is an exposed coastal site, and wind can do strange things around cliffs, hollow concrete, uneven ground, and open grass. Voices from other visitors may carry further than expected, then disappear just as quickly. But in a place like Pointe du Hoc, ordinary sounds can take on a different weight. So when someone says they saw movement near the cliffs, or heard voices where no one seemed to be standing, the story settles into the place. Pointe du Hoc already feels unfinished. The ghost stories only add to the feeling that something from that morning has never fully left the ground. Further along the Normandy coast, the German gun battery at Longues-sur-Mer feels different from Omaha and Pointe du Hoc. It does not have the same wide beach in front of it, and it does not have the same broken cliff edge. The fear here sits inside the concrete. The battery was built to defend the coast from an Allied landing. Its large guns were placed inside heavy concrete casemates, with thick walls around them and narrow openings facing out toward the sea. From the outside, the buildings look blunt and heavy, almost as if they have grown out of the ground. They were made to take punishment. They were made to keep firing even while bombs and shells landed around them. These were not empty chambers during the invasion. German crews worked inside them while Allied aircraft and naval guns attacked the coastline. The men inside would have heard explosions through the concrete, felt the shock of blasts nearby, and waited for orders while the battle unfolded around them. That is the part people often think about when they step inside. Not just the weapon itself, but the men trapped with it. Some visitors to Longues-sur-Mer have reported sudden cold spots inside the casemates and lower sections of the battery. Of course, there are simple reasons why these places can feel cold. Thick concrete holds damp air, and rooms built partly into the land do not warm up easily. But people who mention these cold patches often describe more than temperature. They talk about a heavy feeling, as if the room changes around them once they are inside. Others have spoken about the feeling of being watched from the darker corners, or from deeper parts of the battery where the light does not reach properly. It is easy to understand how that can happen. These places are cramped, uneven, and full of shadows. A person's eyes take time to adjust, and the mind can start filling in what it cannot see clearly. But even when you know that, standing alone in one of those concrete rooms can still feel wrong. There are also quieter stories connected to sound. Visitors sometimes describe hearing movement where no one is standing, or a dull knock from somewhere deeper inside the structure. Some say it sounds like someone shifting equipment, dragging something across the floor, or moving behind a wall. Most of these reports are brief. They do not build into anything dramatic. A sound happens, the person turns, and there is nothing there. What makes Longues-sur-Mer unsettling is the way the site keeps its purpose so clearly. These casemates were built around weapons. Everything about them was practical. The thick walls, the narrow view of the sea, the enclosed rooms, and the sheltered passages all served the same reason. They were made for war, and that plainness gives the place a hard, uncomfortable feeling. And maybe that is why the battery stays with people. Omaha carries the weight of the beach. Pointe du Hoc carries the scars of the cliffs. But Longues-sur-Mer holds its atmosphere inside the walls. It is quieter, colder, and more enclosed. The haunting here, if that is what people are feeling, does not seem to call out from the open ground. It waits in the concrete, where the light fades, and every sound feels closer than it should. Before dawn on June 6, 1944, the war came down over the countryside near Ravenna. American paratroopers were landing across unfamiliar ground in the dark. Many had missed their drop zones. Some came down far from the men they were meant to be with, carrying heavy equipment and trying to get their bearings, while gunfire and flares broke up the night around them. For some, the first hours of D-Day were spent moving carefully through fields and lanes, searching for landmarks, listening for voices, and trying to work out whether the next sound in the darkness meant help or danger. One of the places connected to those early hours is Marmion Farm, near Ravenna. The farm stood among the fields and lanes where scattered paratroopers were trying to regroup. In the darkness, a place like that could become important very quickly. A wall could give cover. A yard could become a way through. A building could hold wounded men, enemy soldiers, or civilians caught in the middle of the fighting. Some accounts connected to the site speak of old beams and buildings marked by the fighting. Bullet damage has been mentioned in stories about the farm, and whether every detail can still be checked today or not, it is easy to understand why people focus on the buildings themselves. A farm is meant to hold daily life. Once fighting passes through it, the place becomes something else as well. A wall is no longer just a wall. A beam is no longer just a piece of timber. It becomes part of what happened there. The haunting reports around Marmion Farm are usually quieter. They are more often about presence. People speak of a stillness around the old buildings that feels strange. Some describe footsteps where no one is walking, or the sense of movement nearby that stops as soon as they turn to look. Others talk about the feeling that someone has just passed close by, even though the yard or room is empty. People describe the place as if the past has not fully drained out of the walls. For a paratrooper moving through that countryside before dawn, every decision carried risk. He might not know where his unit was, whether the farmhouse ahead was safe, or who was moving beyond the next hedge. A voice in the dark could mean another American, a German patrol, or a civilian just as frightened as he was. There was little time to think clearly. A man had to listen, judge, and move carefully, knowing that one wrong choice could cost him his life. And maybe that is why Marmion Farm still draws these stories. The haunting, if that is what people are sensing, does not seem loud or theatrical. It sits in the idea of men moving through an ordinary place during an extraordinary night. It sits in the damaged wood, the empty yard, the old buildings, and the thought that the farm once held moments of panic that passed quickly but did not fully leave. Further inland, the town of Sainte-Mère-Église carries one of the best-known human stories of D-Day. It is remembered because of what happened in the early hours of June 6, 1944, when American paratroopers came down over the town in darkness. The landings did not unfold neatly. Men were scattered across fields, rooftops, lanes, and gardens. One of those men was Private John Steele of the 82nd Airborne Division. During the drop, his parachute became caught on the church steeple in the center of Sainte-Mère-Église. He was left hanging above the town while the battle unfolded below. Private Steele survived, but the image of a paratrooper trapped against the church has become one of the most famous scenes connected to D-Day. Even today, a parachute and figure are displayed on the church tower as a reminder of what happened there. That detail gives the town a strange feeling before any ghost story is added to it. Most places have memorials on the ground. Sainte-Mère-Église has one, hanging above the street. Visitors look up and see a man suspended in the same place where a real soldier once hung in the dark, trying not to move, trying not to draw attention, while gunfire and confusion filled the town below. And that is where the atmosphere of Sainte-Mère-Église begins to feel different. Some visitors have spoken about the town feeling unusually still around the church, especially early in the morning or later in the evening, when the crowds have gone and the streets are quieter. There are stories of footsteps heard near the church square. Others describe the feeling of being watched from above, only to look up and see the reminder of Private Steele still hanging there. There are also stories from the wider area around Sainte-Mère-Église of people sensing movement in lanes and fields connected to the airborne landings. It is easy to understand how those stories formed. On the night before the beach landings, the countryside was filled with scattered men trying to find their way through darkness. Some were lost, some were injured, some had landed alone and were trying to survive long enough to reach their units. The thought of those men moving through the night still seems to cling to the land around the town. Of course, Sainte-Mère-Église is also a place where memory is very present. Visitors arrive already knowing the story. They look at the church, they see the parachute, and they imagine what it must have been like. That can shape how a person hears sounds or reads a quiet street. A footstep might only be another visitor around a corner. A shadow might only be movement behind a window. A sudden chill might only be the evening air moving through the square. So when visitors say the streets around Sainte-Mère-Église feel haunted, it may not be because they have seen a ghost in the usual sense. It may be because the town still feels occupied by that night. The church, the square, the rooftops, and the roads leading out into the countryside all seem to hold the same quiet question. What would it have felt like to fall from the sky into darkness, with the war waiting below? The Normandy American Cemetery sits on the high ground at Longues-sur-Mer, looking out toward the same coastline where so many men came ashore on D-Day. There are more than 9,000 American graves here. Row after row of white crosses and stars of David stretch across the grass, each one marking a life that ended far from home. Some of the men buried here died on the beaches. Others died in the fighting that followed, as the Allies pushed inland through Normandy. For visitors, the scale can be difficult to take in. You may understand the number before you arrive, but seeing the graves laid out in front of you is something else entirely. Some visitors have described a feeling they cannot quite explain. They speak of a sudden sadness that seems to come over them, even before they have reached the rows of graves. Others mention the feeling of being watched, in a way that makes them more aware of where they are. It is as if the cemetery asks something from you the moment you step inside. There are stories of people hearing faint footsteps on the grass when no one appears to be nearby. Others have said they heard a low voice or the sound of someone moving behind them, only to turn and find the path empty. These are small moments, often uncertain, and the people who describe them tend to speak about them quietly. In a place like this, even a small sound can feel personal. But that is part of why the cemetery affects people so strongly. It does not need a clear apparition to feel haunted. The names are already there. The dates are already there. The story is already there, repeated thousands of times across the grass. Some visitors say the most powerful moment comes when they look from the cemetery back toward the sea. From that height, Omaha Beach can seem peaceful. The waves move as they always have. The shoreline looks calm. And yet, below that view is the place where many of these men fought, fell, and never left. And maybe that is why the Normandy American Cemetery becomes the emotional center of the story. It reminds us that every ghost story connected to D-Day begins with real people. So when visitors say they feel something there, it may not be a haunting in the way people usually mean it. It may be memory, it may be grief, it may be the mind trying to understand the scale of what happened. But standing among those white markers, with Omaha Beach below and the sea beyond it, it is easy to understand why some people feel that Normandy has never fully let go of its dead. The ghost stories of Normandy are not easy to separate from the history that created them. Some of the reports may have simple explanations. A voice inside an old bunker could be an echo. A strange shape near the cliffs could be light playing tricks at the wrong moment. A sudden chill in a concrete room could be nothing more than damp air held inside thick walls. But in Normandy, even the ordinary explanations do not always settle the feeling. These stories are not happening in places that feel empty of meaning. They are happening on the ground where real fear and loss once changed everything. That is why the stories stay with people. They are not only about ghosts, they are about what happens when a quiet place still carries the memory of something violent. A visitor can stand on Omaha Beach and see only calm water, but they know what came across that tide. They can step into a bunker and understand that men once waited there, listening to the world breaking apart outside. They can look across the cemetery above the beach and realize that every marker belongs to someone who had a name, a family, and a life that did not continue beyond Normandy. Whether people are sensing spirits, grief, trauma, or simply the weight of history, Normandy does not let the past disappear easily. Too much of it is still visible. The concrete has not gone. The scars in the land have not fully faded. The stories are still told in the places where men landed in darkness and never made it home.